Blood trickled down Amelia Keating's temple as she staggered through the darkness, her tattered dress clinging to her bruised body. The storm that raged above mirrored the tempest of emotions swirling within her: fear, determination, and a desperate hope that somewhere beyond these endless plains lay freedom from the man who had turned her life into a living nightmare. It was 1875 when Amelia fled her home in Carson City, Nevada, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the wedding ring she would later sell for train fare. The spring air held a bitter chill as she pushed forward, each step taking her farther from the grand house that had become her prison over 3 years of marriage to Edward Thornton, one of the wealthiest men in the territory. "You'll never survive without me," Edward had sneered just hours before, his breath hot with whiskey as his fist connected with her ribs for the 3rd time that evening. "You're nothing but a pretty face with empty thoughts in that head." But Amelia was more than that. At 26, she had grown up watching her father's mercantile business flourish before his untimely death left everything to her older brother. She could read, write, and calculate figures better than most men she knew. Most importantly, she had inherited her mother's stubborn will to survive, a trait that had remained dormant until this very night when something inside her finally snapped. The rain had plastered her auburn hair to her face by the time she reached the train station. With trembling hands, she purchased a ticket east with money stolen from Edward's desk. Her destination was anywhere he couldn't find her. "Oregon," she whispered to the ticket agent, remembering stories of fertile valleys and new beginnings. "Oregon City." 3 days later, Amelia stepped off the train into the bustling settlement of Oregon City. The Willamette River flowed nearby, and the town hummed with the activity of a place still growing into itself. Logging operations and commerce connected to the river had made it a modest but thriving community. With her remaining coins, she purchased a meal at a small establishment near the station. As she ate, she listened to conversations around her, gleaning information about work and lodging. A woman at the next table mentioned that the Thompson Ranch outside town was looking for help with cooking and cleaning. "They're good people," the woman told her companion. "Pay fair wages, too." Amelia committed the name to memory. As darkness fell, she found herself on the outskirts of town, walking the dusty road toward where she'd been told the Thompson property began. Her body ached from the journey and the fading bruises beneath her clothes, but each step took her further from her past. The Thompson Ranch sprawled across several hundred acres of rolling pasture and woodland. In the pale moonlight, Amelia could make out the silhouette of a large ranch house and several outbuildings. Lights glowed in the windows, promising warmth she desperately needed. Her courage nearly failed her as she approached the front door. What respectable family would hire a woman who appeared at their doorstep after dark, disheveled and without references? But the alternative, sleeping outdoors or returning to town where Edward might eventually track her, was worse. Before she could knock, the door swung open. A woman in her 50s, hair streaked with gray and face lined with years of sun exposure, stood before her. "Lord above, child, what are you doing out here at this hour?" The woman's eyes widened as she took in Amelia's appearance. I heard you might need help with cooking and housework," Amelia managed, her voice hoarse from disuse. The woman's expression softened. "Come inside before you catch your death." She ushered Amelia in, introducing herself as Martha Thompson. "My husband Henry and I run this place with our son Preston. He'll be back from the north pasture soon." Martha set Amelia up with hot food and coffee in the kitchen while asking gentle questions. Amelia provided vague answers about seeking work after her husband's passing, a lie that tasted bitter but necessary on her tongue. "We do need help," Martha admitted. "I'm not as young as I once was, and running a household this size alongside ranch duties has become difficult. But we can't offer much in wages. Room and board would be enough to start," Amelia said quickly. "I'm a hard worker." Martha studied her face, lingering on the fading bruise near her hairline that Amelia had tried to conceal. Something unspoken passed between the women, a recognition, perhaps, of pain that men often failed to comprehend. "Rest tonight," Martha finally said. "We'll talk more in the morning." Amelia was shown to a small but clean room off the kitchen. For the first time in years, she fell asleep without fear of being awakened by drunken rage. Morning came with the sounds of a working ranch rooster's crowing, cattle lowing in the distance, men calling to one another as they began their day. Amelia woke disoriented before remembering where she was and why. Her body still ached, but the terror that had been her constant companion had receded slightly. She dressed quickly in her travel-worn clothes and made her way to the kitchen where Martha was already preparing breakfast. Without being asked, Amelia began helping, falling into the rhythm of kitchen work that reminded her of happier days in her father's home. "You've done this before," Martha observed with approval. "My mother taught me," Amelia replied, "before she passed." The kitchen door swung open and a man entered, removing his hat as he stepped inside. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and eyes the color of the sky after a storm, he nodded to his mother before noticing Amelia. "Preston, this is Amelia," Martha said. "She's going to be helping us around the house." Preston Anderson fixed his gaze on her, his expression unreadable. "Ma mentioned someone might be joining us." He extended a hand. "Preston Anderson, welcome to our home." Amelia hesitantly took his hand, surprised by the gentleness of his grip, despite the calluses that spoke of hard work. "Thank you," she murmured, withdrawing her hand quickly when she realized she'd held it too long. Preston was the Thompsons' adopted son, she would later learn. Taken in at the age of 10 after losing his parents to fever, he had grown into the ranch as naturally as if he'd been born to it. Now, 31, he managed most of the daily operations while Henry, slowed by arthritis, handled the business aspects. Over the next few weeks, Amelia settled into life at the Thompson Ranch. The work was hard but fulfilling, cooking, cleaning, mending, and occasionally helping Martha with the kitchen garden. She kept to herself, speaking little except when necessary, her eyes often darting to windows and doorways as if expecting Edward to appear. Preston noticed. He noticed everything about her, it seemed. The way she flinched when voices were raised. How she positioned herself to always keep exits in view. The nightmares that sometimes sent her screaming into consciousness, audible through the thin walls of the ranch house. One evening, after Henry and Martha had retired, Amelia was finishing the dishes when Preston entered the kitchen. He moved quietly for such a large man, startling her when he spoke. "You're running from something or someone." It wasn't a question. Amelia's hand stilled in the dishwater, but she didn't turn around. "I don't know what you mean." Preston leaned against the doorframe. "I've seen enough frightened creatures in my time to recognize the signs. Horses that have been mistreated, dogs that expect a blow instead of a pat." His voice remained gentle. "People who carry their fear like a second skin." Tears pricked at Amelia's eyes, but she blinked them away. "My past is my own concern, Mr. Anderson." "Preston," he corrected. "And you're right, it is. But if whoever you're running from comes looking, it becomes our concern too." Amelia turned then, drying her hands on her apron. "He won't find me here. He." Preston nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. "Your husband." The silence that followed was answer enough. Preston pushed away from the doorframe. "Get some rest, Amelia. You're safe here." That night, Amelia lay awake longer than usual, Preston's words echoing in her mind. Safe. Such a simple word, yet it had become foreign to her. Could safety truly exist for her now? Or was it merely a temporary respite before Edward inevitably tracked her down? As spring deepened into summer, Amelia's bruises faded completely, and some of the haunted look left her eyes. She began to smile occasionally, especially when Martha shared stories of Preston's childhood mischief, or when Henry's dry humor surfaced during dinner conversations. Preston often found reasons to be near the house during the day, checking tools in the shed, repairing a window shutter, bringing in firewood though the weather was warm. Each time, he would exchange a few words with Amelia, nothing pressing, just gentle conversation that gradually coaxed her further out of her shell. She learned that, before returning to help his aging parents, Preston had worked as a trail guide, leading settlers through mountain passes and across dangerous territory. He knew how to read weather patterns, track animals, and navigate by stars. His hands could break a wild horse or gently deliver a calf in breech position. In turn, Preston discovered Amelia's quick mind and education, unusual for a woman of her background. She could recite poetry from memory, calculate figures rapidly, and displayed knowledge of business practices that surprised him. "My father owned a mercantile," she explained one evening as they sat on the porch after dinner. "He believed daughters should understand commerce as well as sons." "A progressive thinker," Preston remarked. "Yes." A sad smile touched her lips. "He would have hated what became of me." Preston studied her profile in the fading light. "What became of you isn't finished yet, Amelia. Stories don't end in the middle." July brought scorching heat and the annual town celebration for Independence Day. The Thompsons always attended, and after some gentle persuasion, Amelia agreed to join them. Martha lent her a blue dress that needed only minor alterations, and for the first time since arriving at the ranch, Amelia arranged her hair with care, securing it with borrowed combs. When she emerged from her room, Preston was waiting in the main room with his parents. His eyes widened slightly as he took in her appearance, and something flickered in his expression that made Amelia's heart beat faster. "You look lovely, dear," Martha said, patting her arm. The celebration was held in the town square, with bunting decorating storefronts and tables laden with food contributed by local families. A small band played while children ran about waving small flags. For Amelia, who had spent the last several years either confined to her home or accompanying Edward to formal affairs where she was displayed like a possession, the casual festivity was both foreign and wonderful. Preston stayed close to her throughout the day, introducing her to neighbors and friends as "our Amelia," words that gave her a curious sense of belonging. They shared plates of fried chicken and fresh corn, watched three-legged races and a surprisingly competitive pie eating contest, and as evening fell, joined other couples for dancing on a wooden platform erected in the center of the square. "I'm not much of a dancer," Preston admitted as he led her onto the floor. "Neither am I," Amelia confessed, though in truth she had once been quite accomplished. Edward had forbidden dancing after accusing her of smiling too much at her partner during a social gathering. Despite their claims, they moved well together, Preston's hand warm at her waist as they circled with the other dancers. For a few precious moments, Amelia forgot to be vigilant, forgot to scan faces in the crowd, forgot everything except the feeling of Preston's steady presence and the music carrying them through the dusk. It was during a pause between songs that she saw him. Not Edward himself, but one of his men, Jack Harlow, who had served as Edward's right hand in both business and the enforcement of his will. He stood at the edge of the gathering, his eyes moving methodically through the crowd. Terror flooded Amelia's system, turning her blood to ice. Her fingers dug into Preston's arm and the color drained from her face. "What is it?" Preston asked, instantly alert. "A man by the lemonade stand," she whispered. "In the black vest. He works for my husband." Preston didn't turn immediately, keeping his movements casual as he guided Amelia toward the edge of the platform opposite from where Harlow stood. "Has he seen you?" "I don't think so. Not yet." With deliberate calmness, Preston led her through the crowd toward where Henry and Martha were chatting with neighbors. He leaned down to speak quietly in his father's ear, then returned his attention to Amelia. "Pa is going to bring the wagon around behind the mercantile," he said, his voice low. "We'll slip out that way." Amelia nodded mutely, terror making it difficult to breathe. How had they found her? Had someone recognized her and sent word to Edward? Or had he systematically been searching every town within traveling distance of Carson City? They made their way through the celebration, Preston's body partially shielding Amelia from view. They had almost reached the side street when she heard a shout. "Mrs. Thornton!" Harlow had spotted her. Amelia froze, her entire body trembling. Preston's arm came around her shoulders. "Keep walking," he urged. "He can't force you to go anywhere." But Harlow was already pushing through the crowd toward them, his face set in grim determination. "Mrs. Thornton, your husband's been worried sick about you." Several townspeople turned to look, curiosity on their faces. Amelia felt the weight of their gazes, wondering what kind of woman would run from a worried husband. "Her name is Keating," Preston said firmly as Harlow approached, "and she's under my family's protection." Harlow's eyes narrowed. "This doesn't concern you, Cowboy." "This woman is the legal wife of Edward Thornton, and she's coming back with me to Nevada." "No." The word came out stronger than Amelia expected. "I'm never going back to him." "That's not your choice to make, madam." Harlow reached for her arm. Preston moved so quickly that even Amelia, standing beside him, barely registered the motion before Harlow was stumbling backward, clutching his wrist. "Don't touch her," Preston said, his voice dangerously quiet. A small circle had formed around them now, the celebration continuing beyond but those nearby watching with growing interest. Harlow straightened, his face flushing with anger. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he growled. "Mr. Thornton is an influential man. He'll have this whole town burned to the ground if that's what it takes to get his wife back." "Edward doesn't own me," Amelia said, finding strength in Preston's steady presence beside her. "Our marriage was a business arrangement between him and my brother after our father died. I had no choice." Murmurs rippled through the onlookers. A woman in a flowered bonnet clicked her tongue sympathetically. "Whatever story she's told you," Harlow addressed the crowd, "the truth is she abandoned her lawful husband without cause, a man who gave her everything a woman could want." "Everything except safety in her own home," Amelia countered, her voice rising. She pushed up her sleeve, revealing a scar that circled her wrist. "He did this by binding my hands when I tried to leave the first time." She turned to face the townspeople directly. 3 years, I endured being treated like property. 3 years of beatings when his business dealings went poorly, or when dinner wasn't to his liking, or when he simply had too much to drink." Harlow's expression darkened. "Mr. Thornton disciplined you as any husband has the right to do with a disobedient wife." A collective intake of breath came from the women in the crowd. Several men shifted uncomfortably. "No man has that right," Preston said, stepping forward. "And Amelia isn't going anywhere with you." Harlow's hand moved to his hip where a pistol was holstered. "I'm not leaving without her." The town sheriff, who had been watching from the edge of the gathering, moved forward then. "That sounds mighty close to a threat, stranger. We don't take kindly to those around here." Harlow assessed the situation, noting the hardened expressions on the faces surrounding him. "This isn't over," he said finally. "Mr. Thornton will be coming himself, and he won't be as polite as I've been." With that, he turned and pushed his way through the crowd. Preston immediately turned to Amelia, whose face had gone ashen. "We need to go," he said quietly. "Now." They made their way to where Henry waited with the wagon, Martha already seated inside, her face tight with concern. The ride back to the ranch was tense and largely silent, broken only by Henry's occasional questions about what had transpired. Once home, Preston led Amelia to the kitchen table while Martha prepared tea that no one really wanted. "He'll come," Amelia said, her voice hollow. "Edward always gets what he wants, and he sees me as his possession, not his wife." Preston paced the length of the kitchen. "Let him come, this is our land. You don't understand." Tears filled Amelia's eyes. "He's dangerous. He's ruined men who have crossed him in business." "What do you think he'll do to a family harboring his runaway wife? We're not exactly defenseless out here," Henry pointed out, "and most folks in town would stand with us after what they heard today." Martha set cups of tea before them. "What matters now is what you want, Amelia. Do you want to stay and fight this battle? Or would you rather move on, find somewhere he might not look?" The question hung in the air. Amelia looked at each of their faces, Martha's maternal concern, Henry's gruff determination, and Preston's. Preston's face held something she couldn't quite name, something that made her heart constrict painfully. "I've been running for months," she said finally. "I'm tired of being afraid, but I won't bring danger to your door after all your kindness." Preston sat down across from her, his hands covering hers on the tabletop. "Some things are worth fighting for, Amelia." The way he looked at her made her wonder if he was still talking about her freedom. The next morning, Preston was gone before dawn. When he returned mid-afternoon, he brought news from town. "Harlow's still there, staying at the hotel," he reported as they gathered in the kitchen. "He sent telegrams, presumably to Thornton, and he's been asking questions about us, the ranch, our standing in the community." "Gathering intelligence," Henry muttered. "If Edward comes himself, it will be worse," Amelia said. "He's not a man who accepts defeat." "Neither am I," Preston replied, his jaw set. Over the next few days, a tense waiting game ensued. Amelia continued her duties around the house, but Preston insisted she not go to town. He or Henry went instead, bringing back supplies and news. Harlow remained at the hotel, watching and waiting. On the fourth day, Preston returned from town earlier than expected, his expression grim. "Thornton's arrived," he announced, "with 2 more men besides Harlow. They're staying at the hotel, but they've been making it known they're looking for Amelia." Martha reached for Amelia's hand, squeezing it reassuringly. "The sheriff spoke to Thornton," Preston continued. "Told him that forcing a woman to return against her will wouldn't be tolerated. Thornton told him that retrieving stolen property, those were his words, was his right under the law." Amelia closed her eyes briefly. "That sounds like Edward." "There's more," Preston said, his voice tight. "They've been spreading stories in town, saying you're unstable, that you stole money and jewelry before running away, that you've done this before." "That's not true," Amelia protested. "Most folks don't believe it," Preston assured her. "They saw how afraid you were at the celebration." "But Thornton is offering rewards for information about your whereabouts." Henry slammed his palm on the table. "Damn vulture." "What do we do now?" Martha asked. Preston looked directly at Amelia. "We could try to get you out of the territory. I have friends further north who would help." The thought of leaving Preston sent a pang through Amelia's chest that surprised her with its intensity. In the months she'd been at the ranch, something had changed within her. She had begun to reclaim pieces of herself that Edward had systematically destroyed. And much of that healing had come through her growing connection with Preston. "No," she said firmly, "I won't spend my life running. Whatever happens, I face it here." The pride that flickered across Preston's face warmed something deep inside her. "Then we prepare," Henry said pragmatically. "They'll come to the ranch eventually." They spent the evening planning. The ranch hands were informed of potential trouble without being given specifics. Rifles were checked and loaded. Preston sent one of the younger hands to alert neighbors the ranching community looked after its own. That night, as Amelia prepared for bed, a soft knock came at her door. She opened it to find Preston standing there, his expression troubled. "I wanted to make sure you're all right," he said, "as all right as I can be." She managed a small smile. "Your family has done so much for me. More than I had any right to expect from strangers." "You're not a stranger anymore, Amelia." His voice was rough with emotion. "You haven't been for some time now." They stood in silence for a moment, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. "Whatever happens tomorrow or the day after," Preston finally said, "I want you to know that meeting you, it changed something in me. I never thought I'd feel this way about anyone." Amelia's breath caught in her throat. "Preston, you don't need to say anything," he assured her quickly. "This isn't the time, I know that. I just wanted you to know that whatever comes, I'll stand beside you, not out of duty or principle, but because." He paused, gathering courage. "Because I love you, Amelia, and I believe you deserve a life where love doesn't hurt." Tears welled in Amelia's eyes. After years of Edward's cruel manipulations that he called love, Preston's simple declaration was like cool water on parched earth. "I don't know if I remember how to love properly," she whispered, "but what I feel when I'm with you, it feels like what love should be." Preston's hand came up to gently cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear. "That's enough for now." He bent slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and placed a soft kiss on her forehead. "Try to get some sleep," he murmured before stepping back. Amelia watched him walk away, her heart both lighter and heavier than before. Dawn broke with a clarity that belied the tension hanging over the ranch. Everyone moved through their morning routines with heightened awareness, eyes frequently scanning the road that led from town. It was mid-morning when they came 4 riders approaching at a steady pace. Even at a distance, Amelia recognized Edward's straight-backed posture on his expensive black stallion. Her hands began to tremble as she watched from the kitchen window. Preston came to stand beside her. "Remember, you're not alone this time." The riders stopped at the edge of the yard. Edward dismounted first, handing his reins to one of his men. He was as handsome as ever in his tailored suit, his dark hair and beard neatly trimmed, every inch the successful businessman. Only Amelia knew the cruelty that lay beneath that polished exterior. Henry and Preston stepped out onto the porch to meet them, rifles held casually but visibly at their sides. Martha positioned herself near Amelia, a shotgun within reach. "That's far enough," Henry called as Edward approached the house. Edward stopped, adjusting his cuffs with deliberate slowness. "I assume my wife is inside." "No one by that description here," Henry replied evenly. Edward's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Come now, let's dispense with the games. Amelia has clearly taken advantage of your good nature with whatever tale of woe she's spun. I'm here to bring her home where she belongs." "The lady doesn't wish to see you," Preston said, his voice level but with an edge of steel. "I suggest you respect that and leave." Edward turned his attention to Preston, assessing him with cold calculation. "You must be the cowboy Harlow mentioned, The one who's appointed himself Amelia's protector. His tone made the word sound like an insult. I wonder if she's told you about her episodes, the fits of hysteria, the unfounded accusations. It's a sickness, really. One that requires careful management. The only sickness here is a man who beats his wife and calls it management, Preston replied. Edward's expression hardened. What happens between a man and his wife is private business. Not when it leaves scars, Martha called from the doorway. Inside, Amelia took a deep breath. Hiding while others fought her battle wasn't who she wanted to be anymore. With trembling legs but a resolute spirit, she stepped outside. Edward's face brightened with false affection. Amelia, darling. You've had us all so worried. Don't, she raised a hand to stop him. Don't pretend this is about concern for my well-being. Of course it is. You're unwell, sweetheart. These people don't understand your condition. My only condition was being married to a monster, Amelia said, her voice stronger than she felt. I'm not going back with you, Edward. Not today. Not ever. Edward's facade cracked slightly, a flash of rage showing through before he composed himself. You don't have a choice. You're my wife under the law. The law doesn't give you the right to abuse her, Preston said, stepping closer to Amelia. Edward's eyes narrowed as he observed the protective gesture. I see. You found yourself a new protector. How quickly your loyalties shift, Amelia. Perhaps I should tell your cowboy about the child you lost, about how your carelessness cost us our son. The cruel accusation struck Amelia like a physical blow. The pregnancy she had desperately wanted ended when Edward pushed her down the stairs during one of his rages, then blamed her for provoking him. You killed our child, she said, her voice shaking with suppressed fury. You pushed me down the stairs and watched me bleed. Then you told the doctor I had fallen while you were away on business. Gasps came from Martha and one of the ranch hands who had gathered nearby. Edward's face darkened with rage. You treacherous bitch, he snarled, his cultivated veneer completely vanishing. After everything I gave you, all you gave me was pain, Amelia interrupted, and fear, and scars that may never fully heal, but that's over now. Edward took a menacing step forward. It's over when I say it's over. Preston moved to stand in front of Amelia, his rifle raised slightly. This ends today, Thornton. Either ride away and never contact Amelia again, or face consequences you're not prepared for. Edward glanced at his men who had dismounted and were fingering their weapons. 3 of you, 4 of us. Those aren't promising odds for you, cowboy. You might want to recount, came a new voice. The sheriff rode into the yard, accompanied by 2 deputies and several men from neighboring ranches. They formed a half-circle behind Edward and his men. This is a private matter, Sheriff, Edward said coldly. Attempted abduction isn't private, the sheriff replied. Neither is making threats against members of my community. My wife has made her wishes clear, the sheriff finished for him. Now you have 2 choices. Leave peacefully and return to Nevada, or I can arrest you for disturbing the peace and making threats. Your decision. Edward's face contorted with fury as he looked from the sheriff to Amelia, who stood straight-backed with Preston at her side. This isn't over, he said, his voice low and threatening. Yes, it is, Preston replied steadily. This ends today. For a long moment, Edward stood his ground, calculation clear in his eyes as he weighed his options. Finally, with a curt nod to his men, he turned toward his horse. You'll regret this, Amelia, he called over his shoulder. When he tires of you and you'll have nothing. I'll have myself, Amelia replied, and that's everything. They watched in tense silence as Edward and his men mounted and rode away, the sheriff and his deputies following to ensure they left town. Only when they were out of sight did Amelia's composure crumble. Her legs gave way and Preston caught her before she could fall, gathering her against his chest as she began to shake with delayed reaction. "It's over," he murmured into her hair. "You're safe now. He can't hurt you anymore." That night, after the neighbors had gone home and Martha had finally stopped fussing over Amelia with tea and blankets, Preston found her sitting alone on the porch, staring at the stars. "May I join you?" he asked softly. Amelia nodded, making room on the bench. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. "You think he'll come back?" she finally asked. Preston considered the question. "He might try. Men like that don't give up easily, but he knows the whole town stands with you now, and the law as well." "I never thought I'd be free of him," Amelia admitted. "Even when I ran, part of me believed he'd eventually find me and drag me back." "You are free," Preston said. "Free to build whatever life you want." Amelia turned to look at him, studying the strong profile that had become so dear to her. "And if the life I want includes staying here with you," Preston's breath caught. He turned to face her, hope dawning in his eyes. "Is that what you want?" "I think it is, but I'm afraid." "Of what?" Amelia looked down at her hands. "Of trusting again. Of believing in love and having it turn to ashes like before." Preston gently tilted her chin up until their eyes met. "Some men build love like a prison to keep and control. Others build it like a home with doors that open both ways." His voice softened. "I want to build a home with you, Amelia. One where you're free to come and go, to speak your mind, to be yourself. But only if that's what you truly want." Tears welled in Amelia's eyes, but they were different from the tears Edward had caused. These felt cleansing, healing. "I want to try," she whispered. "I want to learn how to love without fear." Preston's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, he leaned forward and brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was gentle, a promise rather than a demand, and when Amelia responded, it was with the newfound courage of a woman reclaiming her right to choose. As summer turned to autumn, Amelia's position at the ranch evolved. No longer just a hired helper, she began to take on more responsibility, working alongside Martha to manage the household and learning from Henry about the business aspects of ranching. The legal complexities of her situation with Edward remained, but with the help of a lawyer in Portland, she began the difficult process of seeking a divorce, a rare and scandalous step for a woman, but one supported wholeheartedly by the Andersons. Her relationship with Preston deepened gradually, built on mutual respect and understanding. He never pushed, never demanded, always conscious of the wounds she carried from her past. They spent long evenings talking on the porch, riding together to check fence lines, or simply working side by side in comfortable silence. In October, a letter arrived from Carson City. Edward had died unexpectedly, a heart attack after a night of heavy drinking, according to Amelia's brother who had written to inform her. The news brought a complex mix of emotions: relief, a lingering fear that somehow it wasn't true, and a strange emptiness where hatred had resided for so long. "How do you feel?" Preston asked that evening as they walked along the river that bordered the ranch property. "Free," Amelia said after considering the question. "Truly free for the first time in years, and ready to look forward instead of back." Preston took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "I've been thinking about the future too." He led her to a fallen log where they sat facing the water, golden autumn light filtering through the trees above them. "When I first saw you that morning in our kitchen," Preston began, "something told me you would change my life. I didn't understand then how completely." He turned to face her fully. "I love you, Amelia. Not just the strong woman who stood up to Thornton, or the capable partner who helps run this ranch. I love the quiet moments when you read by candlelight, the way you hum when you need bread, the determined frown when you're balancing the ledgers." Tears gathered in Amelia's eyes as Preston continued. "I want to build a life with you, not to own or possess you, but to walk beside you, to face whatever comes together." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. "This was my birth mother's. It's the only thing I have from her. I'd be honored if you would wear it, as my wife." Amelia looked at the ring, then at Preston's face, open and vulnerable with hope. She thought of how far she had come from that terrified woman who fled in the night with nothing but desperate hope. How she had found not only safety but love, family, and purpose. "Yes," she whispered, her voice catching. "Yes, I will marry you, Preston." Joy lit his face as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had always been meant for her. When he kissed her, Amelia felt the last shadows of her past receding, replaced by the warm promise of a future chosen freely and with love. They were married on Christmas Day, 1875, in the ranch house decorated with pine boughs and winter berries. The ceremony was small. The Thompsons, neighbors who had become friends, and the sheriff and his wife who had stood by Amelia when she needed allies. Martha had helped Amelia create a wedding dress from fine cream-colored wool with lace trim, ordered specially from Portland. As Preston watched her walk toward him on Henry's arm, his expression of wonder and love healed something deep within Amelia that she had thought broken beyond repair. "I never thought I'd have this," she confessed to Preston later that evening as they stood alone on the porch of the small cabin. Henry and Martha had given them as a wedding gift close enough to the main house for convenience, but offering the privacy newlyweds deserved. "Have what?" Preston asked, his arms encircling her waist from behind as they gazed at stars scattered across the winter sky. "A love that feels like freedom," Amelia replied, leaning back against his chest. "A marriage that's a beginning rather than an end." Preston pressed a kiss to her temple. "It is a beginning of everything." Spring brought new life to the ranch, calves in the pastures, seedlings in the garden, and the news that Amelia was expecting a child. The pregnancy brought moments of fear as memories of her lost baby surfaced, but Preston's unwavering support and Martha's practical wisdom helped her embrace the joy of creating new life. "This little one will know nothing but love," Preston promised, his hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly. "And stories of how brave their mother is." As Amelia's body changed with the growing child, so too did the ranch. Preston and Henry built an addition to the cabin, a nursery with windows facing east to catch the morning sun. Martha sewed tiny garments while teaching Amelia the folk remedies for childhood ailments that had been passed down through generations of frontier women. On a crisp September morning in 1876, after a labor that tested her strength but never her resolve, Amelia gave birth to a son. They named him Samuel Henry Anderson, honoring both Preston's father and the man who had become a second father to them both. "He has your eyes," Preston said in wonder as he held his son for the first time, tears unashamedly tracking down his face. "And your stubborn chin," Amelia teased weakly from the bed, exhausted but radiant. As Samuel grew from infant to toddler, the wounds of Amelia's past continued to heal. There were still nights when she woke from nightmares, when the memory of Edward's cruelty surfaced unexpectedly. But Preston was always there, patient and understanding, helping her find her way back to the present where she was loved, respected, and safe. The ranch prospered under their combined care. Preston's knowledge of the land and livestock complemented Amelia's head for figures and business. When Henry suffered a minor stroke in the winter of 1877, they took over more of the management. with Amelia proving particularly adept at negotiating contracts with the logging operations that purchased their timber. In the spring of 1878, Martha pulled Amelia aside one afternoon as they worked together in the garden. "I've watched you these past years," she said, her hands busy with seedlings even as her eyes studied Amelia's face. "From that frightened young woman at our door to now a wife, a mother, a partner in this ranch. You've grown into yourself, Amelia." "Because of you and Henry," Amelia replied, touched by the observation. "Because you took a chance on a stranger." Martha shook her head. "We only provided the soil. The strength to grow was always in you." That evening, as Amelia sat on the porch of their cabin watching Preston teach 2-year-old Samuel to throw a small ball, she reflected on how completely her life had transformed. The terror that had driven her to flee had been replaced by a deep contentment she had never thought possible. When Samuel ran to her with a wildflower clutched in his pudgy hand, his face alight with the simple joy of giving, Amelia gathered him close and breathed in the sweet scent of his hair. Over his head, her eyes met Preston's, and the love she saw there still had the power to take her breath away. "Mama loves you," she whispered to her son. "Love Mama," Samuel replied, patting her cheek with a sticky hand before squirming to be released so he could return to his play. Preston came to sit beside her, his arm automatically finding its place around her shoulders. "Happy?" he asked simply. Amelia leaned into his embrace, watching their son chase a butterfly across the yard. "Completely." As the years passed, the Thompsons and Andersons weathered the changes that came to Oregon and to their own lives. The railroad expanded, bringing new opportunities and challenges. Samuel grew into a thoughtful boy with his mother's quick mind and his father's steady temperament. In 1880, he was joined by a sister, Elizabeth Martha, whose arrival brought fresh joy to the family. Through it all, Amelia and Preston's partnership deepened, strengthened by shared purpose and the mutual respect that had been its foundation from the beginning. The woman who had fled with nothing but hope had found not only safety but love, family, and a sense of belonging that had once seemed an impossible dream. On a summer evening in 1885, 10 years after Amelia had first stumbled onto the Thompson Ranch, she stood with Preston at the edge of their property, watching the sun set over land that had become truly home. "You ever think about how differently our lives might have turned out?" she asked, her head resting against his shoulder. Preston considered the question. "I try not to dwell on what might have been, but I know this: I was waiting for you without knowing it, and I'd wait again, through any lifetime, for what we've built together." Amelia turned in his arms, studying the face she had come to know as well as her own, the lines at the corners of his eyes from squinting in the sun, the touch of gray at his temples, the mouth that still smiled at her with such tenderness. "When you found me that day and said this ends today, I thought you meant only the danger Edward posed," she said softly. "But you ended so much more: my fear, my isolation, my belief that love could only hurt." Preston brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch as gentle as it had been the first time. "And you began something I never knew I needed: a life with purpose beyond myself, a love that grows stronger with each passing year." As twilight deepened around them, they walked hand in hand back toward the lights of home, where their children waited, where memories had been made and more awaited creation. The road that had once led a desperate woman to their door now connected them to a community, to a future built on choice rather than coercion, on partnership rather than possession. In the distance, Samuel's laughter mingled with Elizabeth's voice calling for her parents. Amelia squeezed Preston's hand, feeling the answering pressure of his fingers against hers, a silent communication perfected through years of standing together through joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. "I love you," she said simply. Preston's smile held all the warmth of the decade they had shared and the promise of years still to come. "And I love you, today and always." Together, they walked toward home, leaving behind the shadows of the past as the first stars appeared in the vastness above them, constant and bright, like the love that had saved them both.